quickly as I can. Firstly, this is in 1954, Alan Turing ended his life in Wilmslow at a house. This is where he lived. It's not very far from where we are today. On the 50th anniversary in 2004, a small crowd assembled. There's the house. And we had a little ceremony. We unveiled a plaque. The room where Turing bit his poisoned apple. This is it. Of course, he wouldn't have looked like that when he was there himself. He was possibly acting out a scene from Walt Disney's Snow White, eating a poisoned apple. But in 2004, a different cartoon was playing. It was a children's bedroom with cowboy wallpaper. And the reason I organised this was no one else was. Yeah. I thought it was amazing that 50 years after this. Yeah. So, what will Spencer Brown's reputation be 50 years after his death? I sort of doubt he could reach the heights of Turing, but who knows? Could Spencer Brown be on the money in 2066? Will it be worth anything? The laws reform is still being read, but I think any account of his life has to somehow encompass his later works, which, to put it politely, are peculiar. He said that his late work, Alliance Teeth, makes a trilogy with the laws of form, and his poems, I have nothing to say about the laws of form, I'll leave that to others. But I have found interesting things in everything he's written, and he's one of the few authors where I've taken care to search out everything I can find out about him, including his, even his, oh sorry, this was his funeral. This is where we met. There's the person to whom he wished to be buried next to.
Yes.
His companion in death, Charles Bradlaugh.
Yes. I didn't consult Bradlaugh on the matter when I
But, okay. But even this book, which he edited and published for Dennis Parsons, is deeply interesting. This is how you... Andre Previn said this was hilarious and amazing, and it is, because if you look at a page of it for a few moments, you understand it. Tunes go down, up, down, up, down, up, and so on. And that turns out to be Mozart's Serenade. And using that, you can identify any tune. You've understood it. And using this, I did make a model of all music with my brother-in-law here, Richard Bradford, who's sitting, and we made it. That's what music looks like, spreading out into Parsons space.
That's fantastic.
Is that sugar cubes?
It's a printed model. We printed it in the School of Architecture. And we call it the checkerboard of tunes. I can explain the checkerboard. It's kind of weird, but there is a reason for it. Okay. And this is his first book, what he called his puppy book. And even this, I think, is beautifully interesting. Later in life, when he wrote the stories in Alliance Teeth, one of the crazy stories. One of the stories is called The Mandel, about some imaginary animal. And he talks about the mandel, the mondel, the moodle, the mindle, all the vowels worked through except for you. And I wonder if the reason is that that book was reviewed by C.W.K. Mundell in the Journal of Philosophy, rather disparagingly, and therefore became the man who must not be named. He said, Mundell said, the 6 short and not very relevant introductory chapters need not be discussed here. In fact, they're the most interesting and amusing thing in the book, with the benefit of hindsight, so I think. Okay. Spencer Brown, we've heard, lived under many names including Richard de Vere, Richard Leroy, James Keyes, Maxwell Aintree, and even the Prince of Form. That was pretty good. I think of anyone who believes, and he's, of course, in the Only Two Can Play This Game, he says, there's a passage many of you read, every man is a poet, lover, actor, sculptor, builder, explorer, fighter. It goes on for 64 categories, I'll spare you. And all this he can be by virtue of being a man, not at the expense of being a man. He's an anti-objectivist, a constructivist, a coherentist. The world, he says, is controlled, so he puts it in the lion's teeth. The laws are themselves self-created because they accord with one another. And implicit in this is the idea that the laws might be constructed in alternative ways. In other words, we can live other lives and do other things. And it's perhaps in fulfillment of this that he turned his hand to poetry and storytelling. A very bold move, I think. When I read that someone is combining art and science, usually my heart sinks. Goethe gave it a good go. Bertrand Russell, I don't know if you know, wrote short stories. And they're dire. Fred Hoyle did some good science fiction. That's about as far as I'll go in this direction. So it's a difficult course to take. In the 23 Degrees of Paradise, which is his book of poetry, how does he rate as a poet? I regret to tell you, he might not be any good. Now, there's nothing unusual about this. Bad poetry is the default. And in proof of this, I'm not going to read any. But here's a book called Occasional Poets, which is a collection of poetry by famous authors, including Alan Ayckbourn, Malcolm Bradbury, Roald Dahl, Doris Lessing, Enoch Powell, he's pretty good, Iris Murdoch and so forth. But they're not terribly good. So even if you have a strong literary imagination, it doesn't necessarily convert into the ability to write a good poem. Now, Spencer Brown's style is very compressed, and good poetry should be compressed, as is mathematics. His weakness, I think, is that he doesn't mix with other poets. And if you follow the line of Harold Bloom, that the content of a poem is another poem, the fact he's doing it, as it were, from nothing is not going to help. So I'll spare you some of that. There was, in his effects, do you know this? He's writing angry letters to the newspaper.
Yes. And to Prince Philip.
Right, yes. These are some of the artifacts which are on the table. This is from The Lion's Teeth, which is a very... Well, come to that just a moment. This is the book of poetry, which is a compendium of children's poems typed out. And I speculate they're sentimental, but there are a few funny things. These are poems written by young children. I speculate he was trying to write poetry like a child in the way that some artists try to draw like a child. And he does favour very simple rhyming schemes like A, A, B, B, C, C, or even the awful A, 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 A. And he has a poor sense of rhythm. There's a name for this. It's doggerel. All the same, there's at least one good lyric that I know, which you can see him reading on YouTube, which Graham played at the funeral, which begins, I saw you, my sweet, in Victoria Street. I wish you could say you saw me. You walked by me there with your head in the air, as if there was nothing to see. Blah, 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 blah. So it goes on. My advice to him would have been, try songs, write lyrics, find a composer. Well, a career he didn't have. Which brings us to his storytelling. Stories are the principal content of A Lion's Teeth. The first story, called The Beginning, is called Zero, and I really like that. And I would like, instead of writing preface, from now on we should have chapter 0, or maybe even chapter -1. So we're going to start the number line in books, any of us who write from now on. In memory of GSB, we're going to start at nothing. And the beginning story is quite a good joke. A king's claim to power is that he can kill people. A young man asks him to prove it. The king does nothing. The young man leaves disappointed. That night he dies. and then the conclusion is, when royalty kills, it kills without malice and without guilt. Consequently, it is always loved. For death, being a great pleasure, just as birth is a great pain. The stories in A Lion's Teeth are, some of them are smutty, there's comedy, a few jokes. The tone is cynical and ironic. Irony is a common theme in modern children's stories, if you're familiar. Often they're reworkings of older tales, but done in a satirical way. I find it rather unpleasant as a father, some of the things I've had to relate to my own children from what are passed off as. But that's the modern way. The stories, he said, are parables direct from nowhere. Again, as with poetry, it appears to have come out of nothing, perhaps out of the unmarked state. But that is usually, well, that must be an error, because stories, as we know in sort of structural theories of narrative, belong in a pattern of other stories, which he appears to be unaware of. He is a hermetic author, a theme I think we've seen in many other discussions of his work. And the stories are mixed with metaphysical speculation. And of course, the most amazing thing of... Let me show you. I have 3 copies of the book. This is what you could buy. It's half in English, by the way, and half in German, on facing pages, like something from Wittgenstein. This is a copy that he posted me, which has been amended by him, with many deletions. I can show you a picture. That's the amended version, and that's the real thing, what we might say, and this is the one. And there's a third version we found amongst these effects, which I got via Graham's collection, where he's actually razored out many of the pages. Cut out. So that is the content of the razored set, and that is, go back, that's the complete book. So you can see how much is taken out.
And was there, forgive me, was there anything significant about the missing
Well,
page?
we'll come to that.
Oh, sorry.
He said, I've had to send you one of my working copies. I've red penciled out what I think must be deleted in any subsequent printing. The stories are marvellous, but much of the contextual material is at worst offensive to Western readers and at best embarrassing. For me, it was not enough to be told that it could not be done. I had to conduct the experiment to prove it, to see, and now I see why, I must limit the damage by suppressing the rest of the edition. So, what is he taking out? Well, one of the themes in the book is that he claims he was enlightened, and he describes quite baldly. I became enlightened at 14:23 hours Greenwich Mean Time on the 7th of September 1970 in the front upstairs room of 2 The Terrace, St Peter's Street, Cambridge, England, under the shade of an impressive locust tree. I had just finished the first draft of Only 2 Can Play This Game, so he goes on. He called this his e-birthday. In other words, he's an emancipated being, a Tathagata. Now, in the adapted versions of the book, like this one, all reference to the Enlightenment and his frequent other references to his being a Tathagata have been struck out, either with a razor or with a red pen. Now, what he's doing here is writing what we call sur rature, or under erasure. It's a philosophical device. I think it goes back to Heidegger, and it involves crossing out a word within a text, but allowing it to remain legible and in place. It's also much used by Derrida, as I'm sure you know. So the edited version hints that he's overreached himself and he's trying to prune back, but at the same time the omission is obvious. So he's saying this is and is not there. And one thinks of Wittgenstein, the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. Or in the Tao Te Ching, when it says, those who speak know nothing, those who know are silent. But I'm also reminded of a very funny Chinese, I'm going to read you a Chinese poem by Po Chui. It's about 840 AD. So this is, you think, this is in China, they were doing this in 1200 years ago. It's called The Philosophers. This is what our poet says. Those who speak know nothing. Those who know are silent. Those words, I am told, were spoken by Lao Tzu. If we are to believe that Lao Tzu was himself one who knew, how come it that he wrote a book of 5,000 words? So we're obviously trying to say something here that's impossible to express. How do we speak of the unspeakable? We indicate it, we give instructions, we act injunctively, we point, we show it in our lives. And I think a sympathetic understanding of Spencer Brown's literary works, given the existence of the laws of form, that is, he was trying to express a meaning that cannot be understood, speaking, as it were, about the unmarked state in just these sort of ways. He was not the first to do this. Similar past things can be found in Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. Nietzsche said, I refuse to be a saint. I would rather be a clown. Nietzsche here is dealing, I think, with the death of God. But there are other examples, even in the Bible, most famously in Ezekiel, who was instructed by God to persist in his message of judgment, even though he was told the people would not understand him. And one ironic result of this, of course, was that Ezekiel became a popular preacher. And he had then to resort to speaking in riddles, acting out his message, refusing, for instance, to mourn for his wife, in fact, becoming a rogue. And this gives, I think, the most charitable aspect of the roguish attitudes, roguish aspects of Spencer Brown's life, who undermined himself in order to, in some way, emphasize what he was unable to say. Thus, we may see in him the character of a prophet, not a happy role, but it might be in the company of Wittgenstein and Nietzsche we eventually find it. Thank you. And now. Oh, yes, you want a question?
I heard a tape recently of Spencer Brown talking in, I think, Heidelberg in Germany in the 90s, and he was talking to, I think, a passage in that book where he was talking about the first son and the second son.
Yes, there are.
Ascending, and there and lots of other places, I pick up some sort of something about his mother, his relationship with his mother, and some hurt there. I mean, is there any more to say about that?
The stories are so short. You can pick up themes of two brothers. That's a common one. But I imagine if you're writing a biography of Spencer Brown, you would, in fact, use The Lion's Teeth as one of your sources of what he's really thinking about. It is clearly, I would say, quite a disturbed book. And perhaps I haven't had time to talk about the experience of reading it, but it is a difficult read, and there are very odd things in it. If all we had was a lion's teeth, I doubt we'd be here today. Let me say that, to be frank. But in the light of the laws of form and what we know about his life, I think it is a very revealing book.
Mm.
And we have a big box of them upstairs.
Well, at reasonable prices, I might say.
I have a question that maybe the philosophers in the room could chime in. I don't know. And actually, I had a conversation about this since Derrida was brought up. I was thinking about the critique on phenomenology and also just the sort of tradition of, I think Kant sort of mentions this as well, but when looking at artwork, you look at the frame of a painting, for example, and then so you know what the artwork is by looking at the inside of the frame, saying, okay, this is the artwork, and then what's outside of the frame is not what the artwork is. But then, and I think Derrida uses words like ergon and parergon, which is the inside and the outside. But then there's a shift that happens when the title of the work that's not necessarily part of within the frame, but it's outside, is considered part of the work. And what you just mentioned about lion's teeth sort of like, follow, it's still part of the, the ergon and the parergon distinction starts getting blurred in a way. And
well, there is something of that in this book because the title is irrelevant to the contents. And he chose the title Lion's Teeth because if you have A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, D is 4, and so on, and you encode the title, if you add up the letters of the title, it comes to 128. And the same is true of laws of form. He mentions this in the book. I checked it, and it's true. So in some sense, he's giving it a meaningless title because it satisfies some ridiculous puzzle rather than the contents inside. So there is some game of non-reference being played. These are the books being crossed out.
One of those images that flashed by was of a box with the word Tarati written on the side, which I think was an organisation set up for educational purposes.
Well, it's also a game he made,
Was it?
and we have some on the table.
Oh, that's what the game
I have
is, isn't it?
there are instructions for it which I scanned. I can send that. Maybe I should just put them on the website.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And he had 7 boards made by the kind of marketry items that are on there. We're going to have to dispose of them.
Tarati is the Sanskrit word to cross over. Comes from the root 3.
Is that right?
Which
But
which is also in the word avatar. when a god comes down into human form.
Well, maybe the game is more interesting than we've suspected.
Which edition is this one?
He pronounced it Tarati rather than Tarati.
Yeah, can I just
It's
mention
short
that business about him, that moment of inspiration that he had, when he describes where he was, what tree was under, all that. That reminds me very strongly of Edward Gibbon's passage about the moment when he finished the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, because he describes the exact minute, the exact day, the weather, the tree he was sitting under in what garden in Lausanne in Switzerland and so on. And I can't believe that he didn't get the idea from something like that. He doesn't claim it's inspiration, but he does actually realise he thinks he's done a big thing and he wants to record the very moment when it was complete. In his autobiography, Gibbon.
Okay, yes.
Well, no, it's a well-known passage.
You can visit the spot today. There's a statue, really beautiful.
It just sounds exactly like that.
No, sorry, it's where in Lausanne there's a lion let in a hole in the cliff, isn't there?
I don't know.
It's one of the most insanely beautiful places in the world.
Okay.
But there's also the Newton and the tree and Buddha.
Oh yes, I see what you mean. Yes.
It's the,
So
it's the
he
Buddhist
is-
connection. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So he's explaining his enlightenment in terms of there is some history in that case. Right. Good. I like it. Right. Good.
He
Put that in the
sometimes.
book.
Sorry. He sometimes, when asked whether he was a Buddhist, sometimes when asked whether he was a Buddhist or not, he replied, "No, I'm the Buddha."
Messing about, yeah.
I have a question about the title of the book. Excuse me, A Lion's Teeth. Because in French, so some French speaker helped. Dent de lion.
The flower.
Yeah.
Yes, the flower. Yes, it is.
Yes.
But why dandelions?
Well, they're also called pissenlits.
Yeah.
They're supposed to
Sure.
yeah, either stop you wetting the bed
Yeah.
or help you to urinate. I'm
Yeah.
not sure which way it goes.
It's an imperfect consonants.
Oh, very good. So, well, maybe this is the answer.
Maybe.
So those who've read the book will be aware of this, but in the preface he goes into the numerology behind the name of the book and links it to some other books he's written. It has the same value. And he mentions the French name as well.
When he said he wanted to suppress, when he said he wanted to suppress the edition, did he buy?
Sorry, did he?
He mentioned that he wanted to suppress the edition, the rest of the edition.
Yes.
Did he buy them?
Well, we do have a big box of them,
Right.
which of course I think they should be distributed. I think we should all get one. We also have a big box of 23 Degrees of Paradise. But the book was never republished, and I can't imagine it will be republished in this mutilated form. So we have the two, if you like, these are the real ones here. So what we do with those, I don't know.
So I just want to say, I don't want to take up your question time with any of my speech, so I'm the only member of Tarati that I know of, just because he said I was over the phone. Because I'm enlightened. He never went back on that. I mean, he would talk about it all the time. I think he can be simultaneously enlightened and embarrassed of saying that it happened, here and there. I mean, I think it also did. I think it did and it didn't. I mean, not to be too weird about it, new agey or whatever. In fact, it doesn't have to be a Western reception of the Eastern logic. The Eastern logic, of course, is like in Nagarjuna's Prajna Paramita, it's you have your tetralemma where you have both it is and it isn't and all the four possibilities instead of just the Aristotelian two, So I mean, I think we can have it both ways, and as you mentioned, you have your ergon, the work itself, but also the para-ergon, as Derrida talks about, and the various other names for the framing, but also in contrast to the Greek ergon is its partner radion, or the light, the easy street. There's the hard work, and then there's radion, and that's just the state of everything being enlightened, and we kind of all have that, even though we're also unenlightened. So he just knew that, I think.
Okay.
But I don't want that to short circuit any more questions. Do we have more time? And I think we should use it.
No, we're good.
For these
Leon.
topics.
Is Leon on next?
Is he?
Yeah.
Oh.
No, with the talk, right?
Oh, okay. No, I think we should continue with some questions. Since we have some minutes.
I suppose, Andrew, listening to you and listening to Vanilla as well, I suppose I've got a question about self-awareness. And, Vanilla and I were talking yesterday evening about systems conferences. What is it about systems conferences where we feel a very strong sense of community, that somehow we've got some common language, some shared understanding. And here we are, looking at the work of a guy who's, the work is puzzling really, in many ways. It doesn't quite fit together. But we've got a very strong sense of community amongst ourselves. in this situation. I'm asking myself whether that's to do with the work or it's to do with the context that each of us is finding ourselves in this rather crazy world that we're in at the moment.
Go on.
Well, I think different people would have different answers to that, but the work is about, the work, Spencer Brown's work, is about distinction.
Yes.
And people who are drawn to it are drawn to that contemplation of what is created or how do you create a distinction. They're drawn to that.
Yes, sure.
And the work is puzzling because the subject is puzzling. Of what is a distinction?
Indeed. That is something to think about. You know, that is a question. Something that you said, Vanilla, that I've been thinking about since you said it, was that all those cybernetic people, I read that in the Pickering book, but I didn't register, they all changed their names.
Absolutely.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
But it may, perhaps when you study systems, the thought occurs to you that you could be different. That this thing, the mechanism through which you involve yourself in the world is in fact constructed, and maybe you can do it different. Well,
Andrew, when he uncovered that fact
Yes.
or recognised it, rang me up in a state of great, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And the best I could come up with it was that it was just after the war, and that people were looking for a new start and a way to identify that.
Yes.
1950 is when they all started doing it. So a couple of years late.
Right.
Maybe.
Well, okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.